With Hashem's help, we're going to learn Yevamos Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Now, we who previously brought two different braises, Rebbe, who learned the dinim of the Chameish Esrei Noshim, Poitras Hein V'Tzorasein from Yibum, from Chalitza and Yibum, Rebbe learned it from the pasuk Ulakacha V'Yibma. What does Rebbe do now with the Oleha? Simple. Right? There was the Brais and Daf Gimel Amid Beis. What does Rebbe use the Oleha for? So when we're up at Daf Ches Amid Beis, we're starting 4 lines from the bottom, the last word of the line. The Rebbe Hai Oleha from the Brais and Daf Gimel Amid Beis, my Yavid Lei. And this is going to be a very easy Gemara. It's going to be a Gemara of Limudim. Let's make sure we get the cases clear. But I'll say the whole thing by heart. The whole Amud is a very simple Amud. There is a rule that when Hashem said, and if a person, God forbid, did it, if doing so on purpose would elicit the punishment of kares, only then, if the person did it b'shoigeg, by accident, will he or she be obligated to bring a sin offering, a carbon chatos. Whenever a person violates a law that does not have kares, then if they did that sin b'shoigeg, then they don't even have to bring a carbon chatos. The link between b'mezid b'kares, b'shoigeg b'chatos is not written anywhere explicitly. So there's going to be a general question: where do we learn this link from? We know in the Torah that there are many times that when we violate a negative commandment, you have to bring a carbon chatos. But how do we know that only goes to a case where if it would have been done b'mezid, it would have been a chiyuv kares? So comes along the Gemara and he says, Mi boyalei. Rebbe uses the alel to teach us this din. And this din is not a din only in one negative commandment. There are many scenarios. The Gemara is going to break it down to 5 or 6 cases, but it's all basically the same case. A person or people violating a negative commandment b'shoigeg, and there's a chiyuv carbon, and that chiyuv carbon is only if they violated the sin for which there is a punishment of kares if it would have been done b'mezid. Lich at the time we learned the following: Ein chayavin beis din elo. There is a carbon that is brought by the beis din. It's called a par helem davar shel tzibur. If the Sanhedrin gives an erroneous ruling, erroneous, and they paskin on a certain activity for which God says don't do it with the punishment of kares. If they said that activity is permissible, and people did it, so the Braisa is saying the following: if the minority of the Jewish people did it, then every individual who did a sin b'shoigeg, because they thought they're doing something kosher, because that's what the Sanhedrin said, every individual has to bring a carbon chatos. A normal individual carbon chatos is a female lamb or a female goat, a kizbah or a seirah. But at the moment the majority of the Jewish people did it, we're going to learn this in Masechtas Hoidiyas. What's the majority? Is it the majority of all the Jewish people? Or do we look at every tribe individually and it's the majority of one tribe? We'll get to that there. But whatever roiv is, the moment the majority did it, the individuals don't have to bring a carbon. Beis Din now has to bring a carbon chatos, but their carbon chatos, which is only one, is not your normal female animal. They bring a bull. It's called a par. The Beis Din has to bring a par because there was a helem davar shel tzibur. So the Braisa says that ein chayavin Beis Din ela al davar. When does the Beis Din have to bring a par helem davar? Only if their erroneous ruling was regarding a sin for which there is a kados punishment if it's done b'mezid. There, when the people did it b'shoigeg, again, if it would have been miyut, everyone would have brought a chatas. Once you have a roiv tzibur, then the Beis Din has to bring the par helam davar shel tzibur. V'chein haMoshiach. Likewise, there's a din that if the kohen haMoshiach, meaning the anointed kohen, we learned this extensively in Masechtas Yuma, refers to the kohen gadol. That if the kohen gadol does a sin by accident, there are opinions that hold he brings no carbon chatas. However, if the Kohen Gadol is a learned Kohen Gadol, and he mistakenly learns Pshat and a Pasuk wrong, and because of his erroneous understanding of a pasuk, he concludes that a certain activity is permissible when it really is asur, and then he did his mistake, and then he realized he made a mistake in his limud, so then there's a din that he has to bring a carbon chatos. When does he have to bring a carbon chatos? Again, the Braisa says, only if he did something for which doing it on purpose would have elicited a punishment of kares. But if he made a mistake in a normal law for which there is no kares, even though he did it, b'shoigig, but he did it, there's no carbon at all. Turning the page, daf tes. And likewise in the din of avodas kechavim, forget about the details, just the concept. Whenever there's a chi of carbon, it only goes zdoine kares shigosei chatos. Same thing with avodas kechavim. What's avodas kechavim? Again, if the beis din paskent that a certain activity regarding idol worship is not called idol worship, and the majority of the people did it, since it's avodah zara, normally what does the beis din have to bring? Par helem davar shel tzibur. But if it was a sin related to idol worship, there they have to bring two karbanos, a par la'oila and a sa'ir, a male goat lachatos. When do they have to bring the par la'oila and the sa'ir lachatos? El al davar shechayav nazdei nikaros shgosei chatos. And v'tanya nami, we learned in the Mishnah in Masechta Sotiyos, kol mitzvah Shabbat Torah. All the mitzvahs in the Torah. Only if shechayav and alzdoi nikaros, then al shgosei chatos. And what is a carbon chatos? So the Mishnah there goes that if a yachid violated such a lav, then he has to bring either a kizba or a seira, a female lamb, a female goat. If a nasi did this sin b'shoigig, then he has to bring a carbon chatos, not a female animal but a male goat, dafka a sa'ir. Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol, beis din, right? They bring a par. It's called par helem davar. And if their mistake was regarding idol worship, then both the yachid and the nasi and the Mashiach individually have to bring a seira female goat. And if it was a mistake from a Sanhedrin regarding avodah zara, so then the Sanhedrin has to bring both a par and a soir. And which one for which? So the Mishnah says the par is brought as an oila, and the soir is a chatos. Just to clarify, Rashi clarifies when it comes to avodah zara, l'chayr avodah zara is always asur. So we have this din that there are four avodas that are indeed always prohibited. And the words of Rashi is zibuach, kitur, nisuch, and ishtachava. Zibuach means shchita. Any time you someone, God forbid, sacrifices anything to any idol, that's an isur kares. Anytime there is kitur means ha'akrava, if it's offered on their avodah zara altar, or if they poured a libation, or if there's a bowing down, that's always asur. It's good to know, however, if there's a certain idol that if a person served an idol by doing something else, like what chibuk v'nishuk, person hugged an idol. Now, if that was the way of serving that idol, for that is also a isur, a lav of kares. But if a person did something to an idol, and that was not the derech of its service, and it wasn't one of these four, it was chibuk or nishuk or something else, then taka there's no chi of kares. Just to know the din. Now, coming back over here, the question is, yes, shchita krova, Rashi, zibuach, kitur, nisuch, and ishtachava. So now the question is, this is just a question, how do we know this? How do we know that there's the link between kares and chatos? And that's where the oleh comes in. Very simple. Tanur Rabbanan. So we learned the noida'a hachatos asher chatu oleha. Alright, this pasuk is written regarding the general par helem davar shel tzibur. Not b'negiat avodah zara. In this original pasuk. So it says chatu oleha. Look at the word oleha. Now everything is so beautiful. Rebbe has the word oleha open, right? Where did we have the oleha? Going back to what we're learning the whole week, that isha elachaysa lisikach litzroir. Oleha. What isur is isha elachaysa? What prohibition do we have there? It's kares. It's in Pashas Arayos. So Rebbe Yomer Nemer Kan Oleha. It says by Par Helam Davar Oleha, and it says when it comes to Yevama Oleha, which erva, not Yevama. It says by the erva of Achais Ishtoi Isur Kares. It says clearly in the Torah Mala Halon, just like by the erva of Achais Ishtoi Davar Shechayav and Alzdoi Kares. The wordings are not exactly. I'll tell you in a moment. Va'al Shgosei Chatos. By Arayos, it doesn't say that b'shogeg there's a chatos. That is the din, but it's not written there. But it says Aleha by the Erva Chaisishtoi Kares. It says in the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, Aleha Chatos. So we learn both, we learn one from each other. No, it's not that Kares and Chatos are written any times together. No. By Erva it's written Kares. By Par Helam Davar it's written Chatos. So we say, Afkan Davar Shechayev Dini Kares, Val Shigose Chatos. It's Exeda Shava. It's called Exeda Shava. Allah. Now don't forget, the question now will be, according to the Chachamim, according to the Bryce and Nav Gimel Amud Beis, they use the Allah to teach the din of the whole din that we learned. So where do they know it from? Say that it's very easy, just limudim. So now the Gemara says, Ashkechan Tzibur, according to Rebbe, the Allah by the Isur Chatos is by a Par Helam Dover. Only in that case. The Beis Din made a ruling, a wrong ruling, not concerning Avodah Zarah, stam by a lav. So that lav is a lav sheyesh beikaris if it was done b'mezid. However, the din of Mashiach, that if the Kohen Gadol makes a mistake and he followed his mistake and he has to bring a carbon, when we said that when does he bring a carbon? Only if it was a mistake. Shezadoine karis min nalan, because since it says by Mashiach la'ashmas ha'am, the word la'ashmas ha'am, he made a mistake like the people made a mistake. Like the people, what are we comparing him to? We are comparing him, the Mashiach, to Par Helam Davar. Harei Mashiach Ketzibur. And now we continue, what about a Yachid? That every time a Yachid violates a lav, he's only Chai V'chatos, Kizba Seira, only if it was a mistake, for which Zodoine Kados would he know that from? Or a Nasi. So here we have a mitzvahs. Another Gzeira Shava. It says mitzvahs here, it says mitzvahs there. Now, how do we know that by Avodas Kichavim? When does the Beis Din have to bring a par la'oila and a soir l'chatos? Only al davar shechayav deni kados goes chatos. So on this thing, our answers tzibur b'averis kechavim. We learn it out. Einei. It says the word einei by avodah zarah, and it says the word einei by the normal par helam. Par helam, Rebbe learns it Allah. So you have Allah einei. Yachid, Nasi, Umashiach. How do you know in these three cases? By Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara says, Mivi'im nefesh achas. Every time, right at the end of the parsha, Vi'im nefesh achas techte, that's the Yachid, and then Im Nasi, Asher Yasi Yechta, Echad Yachid ve'Echad Nasi ve'Echad Mashiach b'Mashma, and all of these psukim is Vav Moisav Aliyan Rishon V'Yalamei Tachtoin, which is the Elyon. We're learning the Avodah Zarah of a Yachid, of a Nasi, and of a Mashiach from the Elyon. The Torah began before the first parsha is Avodah Zarah. The next parsha is Stamasin. And since the parshas are linked with the Vav, so we learned the Tachtoin, the Yachid, by the Yachid of Avodah Zarah, from the Elyon, from a Tzibur Avodah Zarah. And a Tzibur Avodah Zarah, going back, is linked to what? Is linked to the normal Tzibur from Einei, and the Par Helam Davar is linked, Aleha. That's how we have the whole thing over here. So Pichasid just to know that the Lami Tachten Min Elyon, or Elyon Min Tachten, it has a much deeper meaning than just a literal meaning. Which world is mirroring which world? So you have, Machlekes B'Shamayim B'Silul, which one was created first? Shamayim V'Aretz. And we have the idea of Asrusa D'Leila, Asrusa D'Lasata. And both are true. That sometimes the Tachten is Yilame Tachten Min Elyon. There are many things that happen here that are just a reflection of, a consequence of something that happened first in the higher worlds. And then sometimes you have the opposite. Sometimes we say that the Yilame Elyon Min Tachten. Right, the word of who was it, the Mittel Rebbe, or the Magid, that Hashem Tzilcha, that Hashem is your shadow. In other words, we make a movement, and Hashem shadows our movement. That's Yilamid Elyon Min Tachten, but both are true. In this case, it's a case of Yilamid Tachten, the Yachid Avodah Zarah, from the Elyon, the Tzibur Avodah Zarah. Now, what's the question? What will the sages do? It's simple. The sages used Allah for the din of Allah, Yibum, and not the co-wife of your erva shaloi b'makom yibum, that you could marry the co-wife. So how did they learn the whole din of kares, the link between kares and chatos? The Rabbanan says, the Rabbanan, hi, svara. The word svara here doesn't mean svara. The word svara means this principle, this link between chatos, to a lav only with kadis, minalu. So they learn it from the following. Rabbi Yeshua read a pasuk. He was makri, a pasuk to his son. The pasuk reads, Toira achas, yelachem lo oisa bishkaga. What is this pasuk referring to? Not to avodah zarah. This pasuk is speaking about a yachid that did a sin b'shoigig. And it says there, Toira achas. With what? What are you comparing this din to what? To the next pasuk where it says, V'hanefesh asher tase b'yad rama. That verse is speaking about avodah zarah. So it begins with a link from any sin, from any chatos, to a sin related to idol worship. That huksha kol ha'teira kula, to v'hanefesh asher tase b'yad rama avodah zarah, to avodas kechavim. Idol worship is a sin for which you have kadis. Davar shechem hazoni kadis, v'ashkosei chatos. Unlike before, the given here is that avodah zarah has kadis, even though really there are certain cases of avodah zarah when a person did it shaloi kederach avodah where there is no kadis, but that's not the rule. That's an exception. So we make the comparison to the rule. Av kol davar, when a chayav chatos, when you violated the sin, shechayav and alzadani kadis, then al shkagosei chatos. Okay. So according to the Chachamim, we learn it from the words Toira achas. Toira achas creates a link between stama sin and ilav to the sin of avodah zarah. Now, ashkechan yachid and the nasi umashiach bein ba'avodas kechavim bein b'shar mitzvahs. However, the question is, what about a tzibur ba'avodas kechavim minayin? And what's the din of a tzibur ba'avodas kechavim chevra that the beis din has to bring a par la'oila and a soyer lachatos? Amakra ve'im nefesh. Here we do the opposite. The ve'im is linking now the elyon min hatachten. V'yilamed elyon mitachten. The Gemara says it's not complete yet. Elot tzibur b'shar mitzvahs min nalon. So we answer once. The tzibur ba'avodas kechavim, right? Par helam davar, par l'oila v'sar l'chatos. How do you know that the normal par helam davar shel tzibur is also only if their mistake was regarding a sin for which there is kadis? So here they have the same eniedi. But that's the end of the Chachamim. So what's the problem now? The Toira achas, which was the source for the Chachamim, is expert for Rebbe. So the Gemara says, "V'Rebbe hay Toira achas mayavidlei." So he learns another din. Mi bayalei licha detayim lefish motzino. Since we find that shechilek hakosav ben yechidim lemerubim, we find the following: that when an individual serves idol, there is a different punishment b'mezid versus a group of people serving avodah zarah b'mezid. The group here is in reference to the din of ir hanidachas, which is if an entire city, or if God forbid the majority of a city, if they serve avodah zarah b'mezid, what happens to them? They are all killed b'sayif, right? They are beheaded, and all of their money is destroyed. You bring it all al teicha ir, and it's burnt teil oilam. You destroy the whole city. So we find by avodah zarah that yechidim, if a yachid serves idol b'mezid, what do we do to him? He doesn't get beheaded. What punishment does he get? Skila. Remember we learned before machlokes Rashim and the Chachamim from the four misas, which is the worst? Everyone holds that hereg, sword, beheading, is from the lesser problems. What's worse? Skila for sure. Question is skila even worse than sreifa or not? But a yachid gets killed b'skila. On one hand, his punishment is more severe. On the other hand, his money doesn't have to be destroyed. And this Mishnah is explaining that one balances out the other. That when a yachid violates avodah zarah, since he gets skila, this type of logic, lefikach, mimainam, palate, his money is spared. But merubim, bayir, and idachas, there on one hand, the type of death penalty is a more lenient one. It's besayev, by beheading. And on the other hand, we find the chumrah that all of their financial belongings in the mainam aved has to be destroyed. So now, what happens? What happens if there's a mistake? B'shoigeg, if it's a mistake in idol worship, we find that b'mezid there's a different type of punishment. What happens if a person serves avodah zarah b'shoigeg? So we're bring a korban chatos. It's a sin. But maybe what happens if the majority of a city serve avodah zarah b'shoigeg? One might have thought that yachol nachlik b'karban asayim, that there should be a difference between their chatas offering versus a individual's chatas avodah zarah offering. So that's why, according to Rebbe, it says Torah achas yalochem, to teach you that just like if a yachid serves avodah zarah b'shoigeg, what carbon does he bring? A seirah. That's the normal chatas, a female goat. Even if there was a city or the roiv of a city, a tzibur that did avodah zarah b'shoigeg, each individual of that city has to bring a seirah. Good. Now you don't have to go back and forth now, because the Chachamim hold you don't need to have a Torah achas to teach you that. Of course, why would you think otherwise? As the Gemara Maskevla Rab Chilkia Mahagronia, this is going to conclude the whole sugya. Time in the cause of Rachmana Torah achas, you Rebbe need the Torah achas, but if not for Torah achas, havamina nechlak, you should give a different punishment. Why do you want to give a different punishment? Because you want to differentiate this tzibur to other people. So the Gemara says you would not find a single carbon that they can bring that would differentiate them from another category. And let's talk it out. My lice, what should they bring? Are you going to say that if the roiv of a city served b'shoigeg avodah zarah, that they bring a par, that they bring a bull, and not a seirah? Can't be. Why not? Because then, true, they will be different than the yachid by avodah zarah, but they will be like the par helam davar. Tzibur b'shar mitzvah su the ma'asipar. In other words, we're trying to differentiate this group. And they are not like the par helam davar shel tzibur, because the par helam davar shel tzibur is brought for a sin for which there is no idol worship involved. It's for other avedas, aside of avodah zarah. So we're going to make them comparable to another group, and we're trying to avoid that. If you're going to say they're going to bring a kizbah, they should bring a female lamb, so what did you accomplish? Then yachid b'shar mitzvahs hu ma'isa. Every time an individual does any sin, not avodah zarah sin, the chatas for a lav sheyesh beikaras is a kizbah or a seira. So you're going to say that if the roiv of a city does it, they bring the same carbon?
You're going to say that a city that does this type of avodah zarah b'shoigeg shouldn't be like amazing and shouldn't be like a par helam.
They should be unique.
It should be
something different. But the Gemara says you won't find anything.
Something different than the
you can argue then.
If you did it yourself.
Correct, but the Gemara is not happy with that. The Gemara is not happy with that. The Gemara is saying if you want to make it different, it has to be different. And making it different than the yachid, but making it at the same time equal to something else wouldn't work. That's the logic here. If they're going to bring a sa'ir, that also wouldn't work, because nasi b'shan mitzvahs has to bring a sa'ir, a male goat. Par la'oila v'sa'ir l'chatos. That also wouldn't work, because then you would make the irani dachas b'shoigeg like the par helam davar shel tzibur by avodah zarah that the tzibur has to bring avodas gechavim. The elamai, the only option is seira hainu karbonei. So the Gemara answers no. Two options. Option number one, the itzrach, you still need the Torah achas according to Rabbi. You might have thought hoil with tzibur b'hoira'am maisu. Since when a tzibur following the ruling, the erroneous ruling of a Sanhedrin, the roiv tzibur, the Sanhedrin has to bring par la'oila v'soir l'chatos. There is never a case where there's a par l'chatos and a soir la'oila. So if not for the Torah achas, one might have thought that there's a roiv, avodah zarah, makes so much sense. Everyone has to bring two animals, a par lachatos, a soir l'oil. That par l'oil of soir lachatos, that's by the Sanhedrin. And if it's a roiv of a city, you would have thought inun nami naisu, but how? Ipcha. Right? Bring the par to the chatos, and bring the soir to the oila, inami, or another option. The Gemara explains. If not for the Torah achas, you would have thought that there is no carbon at all. Why? Because we don't want them to be similar to any other scenario. You don't have an option, so that would imply no carbon is brought. And that's not unique, like we mentioned in the beginning of today's daf, that when a Kohen Gadol, when a Mashiach, when does the Mashiach, we explained, when does he bring a carbon? If he gave a ruling, if he was a learned person and he paskined wrongly and he followed this psak din, then he has to bring a carbon, a chatas carbon. But if a Kohen Gadol makes a normal mistake, like any other individual Jew, there's no carbon brought by him. Because we have in the Torah concepts that for certain sins there's no kapara. That's not a good thing, but there's no carbon. You would have thought inami tzarech ve'ein le'takana. So that's the Torah achas kumash malan. And this closes the sugya. Okay. The next, from here, until Daf Yud, and God willing, we will finish the whole thing. We're going completely back to the case of the Mishnah. We're here for the shir. We didn't make copies because we will not go through all of the cases, because to understand the Gemara Rashi in its flow, we will only have to know one or two cases, and for that we can do it by heart, and hopefully we will succeed in explaining this Gemara in the simplest way possible. Okay, starts the Gemara. Amar Levi Rebbe. Levi was a Talmud of Rebbe. These were great men. Look how they had the conversation. Levi, correct, but that was the first generation. That was Rav, we say Rav Tanuhu Palik. And Rav and Levi were contemporaries, but that was only said on Rav. Yeah, but Levi was from the first doid of the Amoraim. So Levi tells his Rebbe, my Iriyadotani Tezvav. Why did the Mishnah only give 15 examples, 15 cases where an Ereve can fall to someone in the mitzvah of Yibum? There is a 16th case. We just learned the Mishnah. What's the 16th case? Look at the Levi didn't even articulate to Rebbe what the 16th case might have been. Rebbe understood what he meant, and he right away counters him. Amalei, it appears to me, kimeduma li she'ein loy mayach bekatkadai, that you don't have a brain in your skull. That was a very severe statement. We find such statements throughout Shas, not often, but it's not unique here. And obviously, not to take this in a negative way, these were great tzaddikim. There was something that he was trying to tell him with that. And even if you go to the back and forth in the Gemara, the back and forth should at least qualify as a normal Havamina and Maskana, that the Havamina is justified, for which you can't tell to the person who had a Havamina that Kamedumali she'ein lach mayach b'kat kadai. Having said that, the Gemara is going to talk out what Levi meant and why Rebbe told him that you're wrong. So let's read it inside. That he tells him, you obviously, Imai Anusas Aviv, you must be referring to the case of Imai Anusas Aviv. Aha, it can be that case. The Mishnah doesn't mention that case. Why? We'll explain in a moment. Because Imai Anusas Aviv plukta the Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanani, and Ube plukta loikamaydi. Let's go through the case. We had this case mentioned in the Dalet. Very simple. Let's go to names. Yaakov. Yaakov had a relation with a woman out of marriage. Right, out of marriage, with consent, a mafuta, against her consent, God forbid even worse, it's called an anusa. Regardless, Yaakov had a relation, let's just use the words, anusa, out of marriage. Literally, anusa means rape, but we'll say the word anusa, or out of marriage. It's gentler. Yaakov was ma'anas a woman. Out of marriage. That's the key here, for the Machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Yaakov had a relation with a woman, and this woman gave birth to a son called Reuven. So now Reuven is Yaakov's son. Now, Yaakov goes ahead and marries Leah. Yaakov married Leah, and they give birth to a son called Shimon. Halkop. Reuven and Shimon are paternal brothers. Can Shimon marry that woman with whom Yaakov had a relation with? Reuven, let's just call this woman, Yaakov had a relation with an Anusa. Let's call her Miriam. Reuven is born. Yaakov then marries Leah. Shimon is born. Reuven and Shimon are brothers, paternal brothers.
Shimon married Miriam.
Can Shimon marry Miriam? We learned that before. There's a lav. A lav is not an erva, which means that the kedushin is chal.
It's a woman that his father had a relation with. That's what it is.
It's a woman with whom his father had a relation. Exactly. And now Shimon married Miriam. And Shimon passes away.
So he wasn't supposed to marry Shimon.
Correct. He was not supposed to marry Miriam, but he married her. Correct.
So the Kedusha are Chal.
Correct.
And now he passed away with no kids.
Correct. And now Reuven is going to be connected to his mother. It's called Anusas Aviv.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anusat Aviv. His
Yes.
mother, yeah.
His mother.
But what's the Havamina that...
There's no Havamina. Now, the question is, can he actually marry her? So it's a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. We learned this in Avdalid, my friends. So the Rabbi Yehuda holds that a man is not allowed to marry Anusas Aviv.
Wait, can who marry Miriam? No, Miriam had a child. Miriam had
And Shimon married Miriam, and now Shimon died. And now there's a scenario where there's a possibility of Yibum between Reuven and his mother. Simple.
No.
Yes.
His mother had a child.
He was the child.
That's right.
Correct. And his brother married that woman. And now his brother died.
What you're saying, there was no children between Miriam and Shimon. Now we're saying that Reuven could...
Correct. Exactly. So now the Gemara says that was the Havamina of Levi. Why didn't the Mishnah mention this case? By saying that it's usher to do it, that she's one of the Arroyos with whom you don't do Yibum or Chalitza. So the Gemara says that the reason why Rebbe tells Levi, that's not a question, because who says indeed that you can't have that marriage? Only Rabbi Yehuda. According to the Chachamim, Shimon, Reuven,
No, I'm sorry, Shimon. Shimon could have married Miriam.
exactly. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Shimon was not allowed to marry Miriam. So according to him, this scenario doesn't exist. So we don't mention it.
It wasn't even a marriage.
You know, it was a marriage, but it was an Isser marriage. Being that this scenario is only a scenario according to the Chachamim, who would allow Shimon to marry Miriam, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's not allowed to marry her. So therefore, we don't mention a case that would depend in an argument. So that's why we didn't mention it. Now, this concept that our Mishnah doesn't have to mention a case that involves a machlokes, that involves a Isser, we'll see that in a moment. But that's the premise of Rabbi's answer. So, and now the Gemara says, I have another case. V'loi, how can you...
According to the Chachamim.
Since this is a case that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there was an Isser done to create such a case, the Mishnah doesn't mention cases that are connected to an Isser that would only work according to one opinion and not to all of the opinions. That's the answer of Rabbi Levi. Let's move on, Chevra. So now the Gemara challenges, V'loi, how can you say, V'harei Isur mitzvah, or V'isur kedusha, the pligi, Rabbi Kiva v'Rabbanan v'ktani. We have in the beginning of next parak the following case. What's the case? If there is a woman who falls to Yibum, but we learned in our Mishnah that there are 21 arroyos, and from those 21 there are 15 cases that can be Asur mid'o'ay raisa, falling into Yibum. What we're going to learn later extensively in Masechtas Yevamos that there are many other women that cannot have a marriage with a certain man because of their kinship, but it's not the kinship that makes them asur mid'o'ay raisa, but there are many other women that are a little bit more distant, but nonetheless asur midrabanan. They are called shniyos. Okay, so a man cannot have a relationship with a shniyos. So what's going to be in a case where a shniya falls for yibum? The question there will be, maybe do chalitza, where one of these women that are only asur midrabanan as a shniyas falls to yibum, or what happens if Reuven and Shimon, if Reuven married a mamzeres, a woman who's asur on the living brother now, not because she's an erva to him, but because of kedushas Am Yisrael, we're not allowed to marry certain women at all. So there we read in the Mishnah Machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Kiva regarding what? Regarding do you need to do chalitza? Everyone holds yibum cannot be done. It's a Yisur Derabanan because of shniyos, or because Hashem says don't marry a mamzeres v'chuli, so you can't do yibum. The question will be: is there a mitzvah lisa doing chalitza? The Chachamim say choltzois. At least do chalitza. Where did we learn something similar in our Mishnah? In the last case of our Mishnah, that there was a woman of me, remember all that? However, comes along Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva holds that you don't even need to do chalitza. Why don't you even have to do chalitza? Because Rabbi Akiva is the opinion that holds that for every chayv alavin, let's speak about the case of mamzeres, for every chayv alavin, even if there is no kares, like you're not allowed to marry a mamzeres, kedushin is not chal, so there's no zika. If there's no zika, you don't have to do chalitz. Bottom line is that
the brother who died, his original marriage is not a marriage.
correct. Correct. So the point here will be, and not in the case of Shnias, that the Mishnah is speaking about Yibum Chalitza Dinim, and the Mishnah gives a case in which there was a machloikas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva regarding what is the obligation. So how can you, Rebbe, tell Levi that the reason why the Mishnah didn't add the 16th case of Anusas Aviv is because according to some Tanoim there was an Isur involved, but according to others there are. So what? Who cares if it's not unanimous? So the Gemara answers B'Pirkin. That when did the Rebbe imply that our Mishnah will not mention a case that involves a machlokes in our Pedic? In the next Pedic, then the Mishnah does mention cases that have a machlokes. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? Our whole Mishnah that tells you that if there is an Isur Erva on the Yevamos, not only is she exempt from Yom Chalitza, but even her co-wife is exempt. Keep on taking as a given, that's actually an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai holds that even if one of the wives was an erva, and she's exempt of Yibum and Chalitza, but you have to do Yibum or Chalitza with the co-wife. And the Mishnah says a din that is really up to a dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So the Gemara answers, no. Beis Shammai, B'Mark and Beis Hillel ain't a Mishnah. That's not a question. And that's a rule that we learned many times together, and we will learn many times again, that when Rebbe, who put together the Mishnayos, is saying a din that is only based on Shitas Beis Hillel, don't say only. It's not only Beis Hillel. We don't even take into account the opinion of Beis Shammai, for whatever reason. It's completely out. So yes, so our Pedix Mishnayos does not entertain a case that will not be a unanimous case. So now the Gemara says, no, Varei.
That it's similar to Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel?
No, it's not similar. That Beis Shammai doesn't count. And therefore, our Mishnah doesn't enter in a case of a machlekes at all. Now, what was the 14th case of the Mishnah? Eishes achiv shloya turning the page. The pligi Rab Shimon and Rabbanon viktani. Question. Let's say this by heart. We learned this in the Mishnah. And I'm going to already speak about a case where there are 3 brothers. Then we're going to make this case into a case of 4 brothers. And then this case will become a case of 6 brothers. And because of the time constraints, we might not finish just the answer at the end, but we will finish the sugya today. And if we don't finish it all the way to the end, then God willing, tomorrow morning we're just going to talk out the 6 brothers case. It's not complicated. We don't need copies. Let's go to the beginning. What was the case of the Mishnah? The case of the Mishnah was that there were 3 brothers. There's Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. The normal Isur of Eishes Ach. The normal Isur of Eishes Ach falls away by Yibum. It's a mitzvah to do Yibum with your brother's wife. So Reuven is married to a woman. If God forbid Reuven passes away childless, so then there's a mitzvah, a chiyuv on Shimon to do Yibum. If Shimon was alive when Reuven was alive, they're called contemporary brothers. What happens if after Reuven passed away, Reuven's father, we don't care about the mother, it's about the paternal, the father gave birth to Levi. So Levi now is a brother to Reuven, but he is a non-contemporary brother. So the simple reading of the Mishnah was, across the board, Levi will never be allowed to marry Reuven's widow. Why not? Because she's Eishes Ach. Yibum, when Reuven passed away, Levi wasn't alive. And therefore, if Shimon goes ahead and Shimon marries this woman, let's say Reuven married Leah, so Reuven dies and Shimon marries Leah, it must be Yabam Leah, and Shimon and Levi live together. They live together. Shimon and Levi were contemporary. Levi was alive when Shimon was alive, and Shimon died childless. Levi will still be prohibited to marry Leah. Leah is Shimon's wife, but Leah is also Reuven's wife. And that Isser didn't fall off because Levi is a non-contemporary. That's the Isser. Yeah? And the Mishnah counted it. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah counted a case that is really up to an argument. Because there is a case in which Rabbi Shimon, the Tana Rabbi Shimon says, that Levi has a mitzvah to do Yibum with Leah. And the fact that the Mishnah mentioned the case of, let's get the words again, of Eishes Achiv Shelo Yehoya Ba'olamai, a non-contemporary brother, that shows that the Mishnah is only the Mishnah is even counting a case where there is a machlokes. So the Gemara answers
Reb Shimon is the one
that says that Levi could marry her.
Not could, but he
Has to. He should. He could and he should. Yes.
Got it.
So the Mishnah is not going to Lashitas Rab Shimon, but there's a machlekes in the din of the Mishnah. So the Gemara wants to clarify that really there
It's all a question really just against Rebbe.
Yes, only against Rebbe. So now the Gemara clarifies, this is fantastic, that really there are two cases in the Reuven Shimon Levi case. Rab Shimon only argues in one of the two cases, but there is one of the other two cases that were unanimous, and therefore that was the case that the Mishnah was referring to. Let's read it inside. There is a case of Noiled Ulubasayf Yibin, the Loi Pilag Rab Shimon. And even though Rabbi Oishia wanted to say that he argues in both cases, but the Gemara says, at the end, the conclusion will be that he argues only in one of the two cases. And there's one unanimous case. What are the two cases? So far it's still simple. Halkop. No, Itoisav means that Rabbi Oishia was refuted. The conclusion of the sugya was that Rab Shimon agrees with the Chachamim in one of the two cases that a non-contemporary brother is asur and therefore exempt. And that's the case the Mishnah is referring to. What are the two? Very simple. Guys, let's halt up. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven married Leah. Reuven died. So far, the same thing. Question is, when was Levi born? See, there's two options. Option number one, Shimon married Leah. Shimon is a contemporary brother. After Shimon married Leah, now Levi was born. The other option will be that Reuven died. When Reuven died, Levi was born. And after Levi was born, then Shimon married Leah. There's a huge difference between the two cases. Logically, what's the difference? If Levi was born before Shimon married her, Levi was born into the world where there was a woman that was then asur on Levi because of Eshes Ach. Even though normally there's a mitzvah of Yibum, but it's a non-contemporary brother, and there's a Isur Eshes Ach. The fact that Shimon goes now and marries Leah doesn't take away the fact that she for Levi was already asur because she was Reuven's wife. That's where Rab Shimon will agree unanimously that if now Shimon passes away, the Isur that Shimon's wife has on Levi remains because she is Reuven's wife. When did Rab Shimon say that even a non-contemporary brother should do Yibum? That is when Reuven passes away. Levi is not born. Shimon married Leah. Now Levi is born. So when Levi was born, what is Leah? Shimon's wife. That's why Rab Shimon disagrees with our Mishnah and says, listen, if Shimon passes away, Levi is doing Yibum with Leah not because Leah was Reuven's wife. Why is he doing Yibum with Leah? Because Shimon's wife, Levi and Shimon are contemporary brothers. That makes so much sense.
Doesn't that go against the whole premise of having to be alive?
Not fully. So that's what we're saying. First of all, Rab Shimon argues. The Chachamim say across the board, asur. No one is debating that. Rab Shimon for sure allows a non-contemporary brother, and then he keeps correcting me, good. If it's allowed, then you have to do Yibum, but it's limited. We limited it that when is he allowed to do it? Only if Leah was never asur on Levi as the wife of Reuven. Meaning, Levi...
without being married to his wife.
That's right. That's when Rab Shimon says it's mutter. That if Reuven dies, if first the case is...
Again, what's the rationale for the difference according to Shimon?
The rationale is that if Reuven dies, and then Levi is born, B'noiled Ulubasayf Yibim, Levi is born after Reuven died, before Shimon did Yibum. So look at the world right now. It's not Shimon's wife. No, it's Reuven's wife. Right. So she now was asur on Levi. Why? Eshes Ach. Right. Yibum, non-contemporary. Since she was asur on Levi now because she is Reuven's, his brother's wife, doesn't take that away. But if Shimon married the widow before Levi was born, if it was Yibim, v'achar kach noilad, only Rab Shimon holds in such a case, when Levi comes into the world, what's his world? He has a brother, Shimon, who's married to Leah. Why can he not marry her? Because she's married to Shimon. That's all she is then. And now if Shimon passes away, so it's a normal case of Yibum. And being that there's a case where unanimously In the case of Noilad, Ulubosef, even Abshimon will agree that it's Asr. So Rebbe's premise to answer his student Levi is correct, that our Mishnah doesn't enter a case of a Machlokes. Comes along the Gemara, this is going to be the final case here. The Omar of Yehuda, Omar Rav. Chavre, be excited about this. This is mamish a tikkun on bina that there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda says the following, that v'chein tani Rabbi Chia bekulan ani koyde behem hu asuras lazeh mutaras lazeh. What is the case? Now let's make it more exciting. We have 4 brothers now. Guys, halt up. We have Reuven.
We're done with.
We're done. No, we're not done yet. Let's go now. We're going to try to prove that the Mishnah mentions a case that has an argument. Now let's go. You have 4 brothers: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. We spoke about these cases before. 2 of these brothers married 2 sisters. We mentioned it in yesterday's daf, which we learned this morning, and we mentioned it in the beginning. It's called Eishes Zikukasai. But let's build it up. Reuven and Shimon, 2 of the brothers, married Rachel and Leah, which are 2 sisters. Both Reuven and Shimon pass away. So what did we learn? We learned that Levi and Yehuda, being that midrabanan, they're not allowed to marry not Leah and not Rachel. Why not? Because how can Levi marry Rachel when he also has the Zekika connection to the sister, to Leah? How can he marry Leah when he has a Zekika connection to Rachel? Even though he's not married to them. But again, quoting the words of Rashi, that Zika is Kiksas Kedushin. So since he's connected to each one's sister, so the Rabbanan says, you cannot do Yibim with either of them. Right? Then we learned the Machlokes, do Chalitz or not. But you can't do Yibim with either. Now what's going to happen? Now it gets exciting. What happens? Reuven, Shimon were married to Rachel and Leah, which are 2 sisters, and both husbands died childless. One of these women, either Rachel or Leah, is an erva to only one of the 2 brothers. They're not co-wives. It's not the case of co-wives. Rachel was married to Reuven, and Leah was married to Shimon. Reuven and Shimon die. What does Levi do? We just said Levi cannot do Yibum with either of them. Why not? Because each one is Eshes Zikul Kasei. What happens if one of these 2 wives was an erva to Levi? That's a good thing now. Why is it a good thing? If one of them is an erva, what did we learn in our Mishnah? That if a person's brother's wife is an erva to him, Paitrais, Mina Chalitza, Mina Yibum.
So let's say Levi's married.
So therefore, marriage doesn't matter because he can marry again. It's not about Levi being married. It's about that one of these 2 wives is an erva to Levi. Right. So in such a case, what do we? Whichever way. So now it's great. So now the din will be that Levi has to do either Yibum or Chalitza to the other wife. Eshes Zikul Kasai, which takes away, very good, that takes away the Chiyuv of Yibum, Midrabanan, is only if he could have married both of them. If there is a permissibility. But the moment one of them is an erva, so now, fantastic. So now the erva is okay. His daughter, Reuven, Shimon, Levi. There are 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah, and one of them is an erva to Levi, his daughter.
So they're sisters from a different.
They have to be sisters from different mothers, but it has to be that there was no wedlock, obviously, because if there would have been wedlock, then it wouldn't. Then if they're 2 sisters, then it would have been usher. You cannot marry your wife's daughter. So the possibility for bitoi to be usher only on one and not on the other is only if she's a daughter born out of wedlock. That's a given. Now, this is a simple law, and therefore Rabbi Chia added, the Mishnah added that if there are 4, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, Reuven and Shimon died. If Levi is an erva to one of the 2, Yehuda is an erva to the other of the 2. To the other of the 2.
That means that Yehuda Yehuda and
Perfect.
Levi's
Levi-
relationship to these two women is the same, where they both have
Not to the same. One of the two, but the opposite ones. So there the din will be that ani koida behen ha'asuras lezeh mutaras lezeh v'asuras lezeh mutaras lezeh. Each one now is obligated to Yom Chalitza. Comes along Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia said, now here is the long Rashi, that bekulan ani koida behen. Bekulan means that in all of the 15 cases of the Mishnah, it's possible, in the case that we mentioned, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, that Reuven and Shimon marry two sisters, again it has to be out of wedlock, that it's possible that Levi will be an erva, think about it, that Levi will be an erva to one, and Yehuda will be an erva to another, under the same type of erva. Under the same type of erva. And you can work it out in all of the 15 cases. That's this long Rashi. So let's say if there's an erva of bitoi, so it can be a case where Levi is going to be, that Rachel will be the daughter of Levi, that Leah will be the daughter of Yehuda. Or if it's the case of a mother-in-law, it's possible that Rachel will be the mother-in-law of Levi, and Leah will be a mother-in-law of Yehuda. And every one of the 15 cases could be worked out in the case of Rabbi Chia, Bikulhan, that the same name, that the same erva, that one is on Levi, the same erva will be the other one on Yehuda.
Okay.
Now, okay, so far so good.
That's why I asked you, out of wedlock, so it would have to be the same woman.
Yes. Then it should be Asr. It will be the same Isra on both. So now the Gemara says, let's read it again inside. Again, v'chein tane Rabbi Chia b'kulan ani koida b'hem asuros l'motoros b'zeh v'asuros l'motoros b'zeh v'achoisa she'yivem teichalitza b'zeh. And therefore you apply the law that Levi only does Yivam Mechalitza with one sister. Perfect. Yehuda only does Yivam Mechalitza with the other sister. There is no din of Esha Zikul Kasai. Now the Gemara has comments on that. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. When Rabbi Chia said b'kulan, he didn't mean b'kulan. Why not? It can only start from the case of Chamoisai, which was the 7th case of mother-in-law. Why? Avol Shita. But the first 6 cases, beginning with a man having an ever to marry his daughter, the cases of the Reisha Loi. Why? Because since for 2 daughters to be ushered only on one and not on the other, it can only be a case where she was born out of wedlock. A man marrying a woman out of wedlock, period, is always prohibited. The Mishnah would never have counted. The Bekulhan, Rabbi Chia never would have thought about a case that came about through an Isur, very much like we learned before, Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Chachamim. Even though it's possible that Shimon would be, that Reuven would have a Zika to Eshes, to his mother, because Shimon married his father's Anusa, but that in itself, we don't want to mention such a case. Now, even though that is only a problem on a daughter, not the granddaughters, we bunch them all together. That the cases that speak about daughters, Rabbi Chia didn't mean that Bekulhan, he was never addressing a case that came about because of an Isser. That's point number 1. Comes along Abaye, and Abaye disagrees. And Abaye says, Af bitoy ma'anusasai, kiven de ashkuche mishkachas la, iboye min anusim teheve, iboye min anusum teheve. No, that when Rabbi Chia said the words, Bekulhan ani koida bahen, he even meant the first 6 cases. The first 6 cases only come about because of a Isur, that someone married a woman out of wedlock. Doesn't matter, God forbid, you're not allowed to do that. But Rabbi Chia worked through, because here again, we're going quickly, so we're skipping over the working out the cases. The Haravanya in this sugya is going through every single one. It's not so simple. Of the 15 cases, again, there are 4 brothers here, and working out how the wife of one is the same type of erva, how her sister is to the other brother. It's awesome. And it can all be worked out. However, Abaye says the following, that there's one case that will not be included. What case will not be included? This case of non-contemporary brother. Why not? He said, why not? So he went in and he said what we learned before, that there's an argument here which we share on the Chachamim. And therefore, even though we said that the argument 2 cases and Rab Shimon agrees in another case, but again, Rab Chia did not think about a case that has an argument. So that case is not mentioned. And on this comes along Rab Safra Metargim, Af Eishes Achiv Shelo Yoy B'Elam Mishkachas La. This is something that we'll have to leave for tomorrow in clarification, that according to Abaya, there will never be a case where there are four brothers, that according to Rab Shimon, one will be usher because of a non-contemporary brother with one, and the other will be a non-contemporary with the other. In all of those cases, Rab Shimon will hold that none of them can marry them. It's usher. However, the Gemara says that Rab Safra says, Af Eishes Achiv Shlei B'Lami Mishkachas Law, that we can figure out a case that only according to Rab Shimon, there's going to be a permissibility to one and an Isser to another. B'Shita Achem Bali B'D Rab Shimon, and we'll just read the first line of Daf Yud, and the Siman will be by six brothers, that Meis, Noiled V'Yibim. We're going to talk about this case tomorrow, but there is a case that according to Rab Shimon, the non-contemporary brother can work out in the case of Rab Chiya. So it can be Bekulan. He meant Bekulan. It can work out that there can be Reuben and Shimon died, and there can be two brothers, two remaining brothers, that each one of them will have a problem with one of the wives because of non-contemporary brother, and the other one will have that same Isser with another wife. And that's not simple to work out, so this will be the case that we will explain.
One that they mother to.
Correct, but that, and that can only be worked out according to Rab Shimon. And here Rab Safra is saying that we include that case. So it's a kasha against Rebbe, answers the Gemara, Elul Rebbe, Hani Kloli Leslie. We'll continue here tomorrow, we'll leave it here. Amen.